everybody. Hello, up here. Hey, you may be wondering why I'm sitting in a tree. Well, that's because I think trees are very cool. All of them seem to be different. Some of them are tall and some are short, some are skinny and some are kind of big and fat, like this one. They have different kinds of leaves, kind of like this. And the bark is even different on different varieties of trees. Plus, I get to spy on a lot of people up here. I want to introduce you to an artist who loved to paint trees into his paintings. And by looking at his trees, we can see how his style really began to change. So why don't you join me over in the High Gatsby studio and wait a minute. Would you like to come up here? Why don't you join me up in the tree and I'll tell you more about Piet Mondrian. Good job, you made it all the way up here. Well, I now want to tell you about an artist by the name of Piet Mondrian. Piet was born in 1872 in the city of Amersfoort, which is located in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is a beautiful country. It's known for its windmills and its water canals, its bikes and fields of tulips and cheese, and these little wooden shoes called clogs. Piet was the second child of 5 children. Here he is. He's the second one from the left. And as you can see, he has one older sister. She's sitting in the very middle of the photograph, and 3 younger brothers. His sister helped out a lot with the younger brothers. I bet she was busy. Now, Piet's father was a school teacher. He taught art, believe it or not, and he wound up becoming the headmaster of the school. Piet's uncle also was a professional artist. So growing up, Piet was taught how to sketch and how to paint his whole childhood. When he graduated from high school, he decided that he would go to art school. It was the Academy of Fine Arts in Amsterdam. And there he learned all kinds of new and great things. And he would practice by painting things that are just found in nature, natural things. He practiced by painting still lifes of oranges and plates, of apples and pottery, and even flowers. He practiced by painting portraits. Here's a self-portrait, and here's a portrait he did of a girl reading. He practiced by painting landscapes of the community that he lived in, and of painting genre paintings. A genre painting is a painting of people just doing their everyday thing. When he graduated from the Academy of Fine Arts in Amsterdam, he began to teach, but he wanted to go someplace, a place where art was changing and was on the cutting edge. He wanted to go to Paris. You see, a lot of things were happening in Paris with this new art movement called the Impressionists. The Impressionists were experimenting with new ways of putting paint on a canvas, and it so intrigued Piet Mondrian. He loved the way that Monet and a lot of the other artists like Renoir and Mary Cassatt would put paint on in little splashes and dashes of color. And as you can see, he began to paint the same way, painting these landscape scenes, these windmills, with splashes and dashes. He loved the way post-impressionist artist George Seurat would put dots so close together that it automatically blended the colors. So, of course, he had to try it too. And he loved trees. I'd love to look at some of Piet's tree paintings, and we are going to see how his style really began to change. Here's a painting that he did in the style that he was taught when he was in school. But then, after seeing some of the Impressionist artwork, here's a tree that he painted using their style. And here's another one. Look at all the splashes and dashes of color. And then we move to the swirls and movement that he witnessed when he began studying post-impressionist Vincent van Gogh. Look at all these bright colors and swirly, whirly lines. And then he was introduced to this new kind of style called Cubism. That is a style that was somewhat created by Pablo Picasso. Suddenly, he wasn't just looking at the trees and the leaves and the bark, but he was looking at the shapes that made up the tree, that made up the branches, that made up the leaves. It was more pure in that it was looking at shapes and not the object. As you can see, you can still tell it's a tree, but it sure has changed from what he learned when he was in school. It became more about the shapes in the tree. And here the shapes become more defined. And here we just see the shapes and maybe a leaf or two. But then he began to concentrate on the lines. When an object becomes unrecognizable, it's called abstract. And Piet Mondrian loved abstract. He thought that this type of painting showed the tree in a purer form, shapes, just shapes. And then these shapes became lines. Lines, lines, and more lines. Okay, so if lines began to be a purer form of drawing, of sketching something, then I wonder what a purer form of color might be. Maybe it's getting down to the primary, the very basic colors. Do you know what the primary colors are, the basic colors? Red, blue, and yellow. With those colors, you can make any color in the rainbow. And so Piet began to use just those colors, pure colors, on his pure lines. And this is what he came up with. These lines became these lines. And then when you add those pure colors, red, yellow, and blue, you get this painting. But Piet thought it might get even purer if it became simpler. So he made his colors purer, and he made his lines simpler. And simpler, and simpler. He even began to remove some of those pure, basic, primary colors to make it even more simple. Piet Mondrian wound up moving from Paris to New York. And he loved New York City. All of the hustle and the bustle and the cars and the people and the noise and the lights and the rhythm of the city. He thought, I wonder if I could add rhythm to my paintings. And so he introduced a double line to his painting. Then he thought to himself, what if I made my lines out of primary colors? Then he added blocks of colors. I want to pretend that you're a bird looking down on the city. You see the buildings, those are the blocks of colors, and you see the streets, and the little colorful squares could actually be the cars moving down the street. And if we add the new music that Piet loved, it was jazz and especially boogie woogie. If we add that to this painting comes alive. Watch this. Loved New York City, and New York City loved Piet Mondrian. They loved him so much they wanted to wear clothes that had Piet's paintings on them. This is a design that was made by Yves Saint Laurent, and the women went crazy over it. A popular TV show in the 1970s called The Partridge Family had a bus that was painted in the Piet Mondrian style. And even today, you will see his fabulous artwork in some of the craziest places, from coffee mugs to purses to socks and shoes, phone cases, and even minions. In 1941, at the age of 77, Piet Mondrian died of pneumonia. He didn't have a wife and he didn't have kids, but his legacy, the things that he did, have been preserved in his artwork. Piet Mondrian embraced abstract art in its simplest and purest form, rich in color and line and movement. I have enjoyed studying Piet Mondrian, and I've enjoyed having you up in my tree with me. Now I want you to remember to tune in to our YouTube channel, and you'll see some activities that I have designed that is going to be so much fun in the style of Piet Mondrian. And remember, stay safe and stay healthy.